welcome British touring car legend John Cleland. Thank you very much for coming on the show and getting involved. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very good. Just suffering about with this lockdown and no motorsport, but I'm sure it'll come back one of those days.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask how is lockdown going for you?
Yeah, well, I've been racing cars since I was 17, back in 1971, and this is the first year in 50 years that I have never raced a car.
Really?
Last year, 2020, was the first year I have never raced a car. So yeah, it's difficult. Normally, at least, I have a Vectra that I bought back, which was my 97 car.
Really?
And we've been out racing that every year. It was ready to go, had a complete engine rebuild. It's sitting in the garage, ready to go in the back of the truck and go somewhere. Unfortunately, no races. So it was a real nuisance. But like I say, I think it's going to be back this year. We're going to see a bit more action quite soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. And that sort of leads on nicely to my next question. How did you start racing?
I got involved very many years ago. I did everything. I did hill climbs in a Mini. I did sprints. I did autocross. I did rallycross. I did night rallies. I've even done a season of rallying. So I've done everything, but I really started like most people did. Unlike today, most guys start in karting, and they go through a number of years of karting from the age of 6, 7 years of age. I never did that. I was 17. I had a Mini that I did sprints and hill climbs with. And it was just the way that people started then, because karting was not the big thing that it is now. And it just evolved through a bit of success. And I was lucky that from very early on, I could get results in hill climbs and sprints and races wherever I was, which I was lucky, I suppose. And it kind of went from there. It grew up from there.
And would you say the aim was to get to British touring cars? Was that something you were like, yes, I'd love to do that?
No, well, when I started, British touring cars wasn't around. There was a saloon car series in the UK. I think it was called the Tricentral Saloon Series, and it was something I watched motorsport. I've loved saloon car racing, and it doesn't matter whether it's NASCAR in America, V8s in Australia, or British touring cars. I mean, I watch it all. I'm very passionate about the sport. And it wasn't something I set out to do. It was a kind of sport that evolved into an occupation. So for me, I started off doing it at weekends, and I had a couple of mates together, and we would pay for some new tyres, and we'd go away and have a weekend away, and it was a bit of fun. It was a bit of crack. Never a serious thought to becoming a professional.
Yeah.
And as things got on, I realised that I was getting decent results. I had a close connection with Vauxhall because I was an Opel and a Vauxhall dealer in those days. Today I'm a Volvo dealer. And I had a close connection with them, so I started to race Opels. And it kind of grew from there because, again, I was getting results. And the nice people at Vauxhall thought, right, okay, there's some sponsorship money. You run your own car with that money. Mm-hmm. And then, again, we got some good results. So the factory Vauxhall team was born, and I was one of the first early drivers on that team. Yeah. And the rest, I suppose, is history. But no, it never occurred to me that I should get involved in racing with a view to becoming a professional paid driver. That was never ever my first thought.
Absolutely. And was it difficult coming into British touring cars? Because obviously it's very different to how it is now. With we had things like there was something like 4 different classes back then in the same race.
Yeah, it was. Excuse me a sec. It was. It's all right. It was difficult. It was. When I won the championship in '89, it was a 4-class championship, and the highest I think I'd ever come in that season was about 11th. When you've got the Sierras with Andy Rouse at the front winning races, and I was about 10th, 11th, or even further back in the class. 4 car, really, or Class 3 car, I think it was. It didn't make sense. So I had won the championship, but had never actually won a race.
Yeah.
So it was a bit confusing for the spectators. It wasn't the best way to do it. And as it changed, over the years to become a 1 class, 1 series, if you want, as the rules are today. In other words, the guy that wins the most races generally wins the championship. So it was a much better format, albeit when I started with it, it was cars that looked a bit like your mum and dad would drive to the circuit in.
Yeah.
They had some stickers on them and they had some wings here and there, but they essentially looked like the car that you drove to the track in. Whereas today's touring cars are very much big fat wings, big spoilers, lower front spoilers. They don't quite look, in fact, I don't recognize what they are sometimes. They've got that many fat wings and arrows on them. So back when I was playing around with it, it was very much, it looked like the car that you would see in the street. That's how it worked. And that seemed to the public would warm to that because they could recognize in my case, a Cavalier. They knew what it looked like because they had one, so they got really close to it that way.
And compared to what you'd previously driven, was it a big step up, and was it difficult?
No, it wasn't difficult because before that I'd driven fairly quick cars. I'd driven cars with sort of 500 and 600 horsepower. So I kind of knew the power was never the problem because a British touring car's got 300 brake horsepower. So it wasn't the quickest thing, but the trick was to keep the pace up, keep the speed up. It was very close. I suppose that's the easiest way of putting it because all the cars and drivers were split by, we could have had 30 drivers split by half a second. So, everybody's right on everybody else's bootleg. So that was the bit that made it hard, and you had to really get your sleeves up and do a bit of pushing and shoving, which I was good at.
Yeah. And what did you have a favourite circuit?
In this country, I would say I have 2 circuits that I really favour here. One is Thruxton because it's fast and you have to be pretty brave there, and I've won a few races there. But my favourite circuit really is going to be Donington because I have won more races in a touring car there than at any other circuit in the UK. So I like Donington. It's got some real character to it, and it's got a mixture of different corners. So I quite like that. Circuits around the world, I would say Bathurst in Australia would be my favourite track of all time. But yeah, that's one you have to go to see to appreciate it.
Yeah, I love Bathurst actually, and I love watching it on the telly. I'd love to go one day. How you've obviously raced there quite a few times. How is it like to drive as a circuit?
Well, it's pretty quick. It's I think it's 6 kilometres round or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a fairly long track. There's a straight where the V8s get up to just under 300 kilometres an hour. It's a track. I mean, most of the races I've done there's been between 40 and 50 cars in the race, and it gets pretty hectic. And it's a 1,000 kilometre, 6.5 hour race, 2 driver change. And it's all, again, fairly frantic.
Absolutely. Well, in British touring cars, you won the championship again in 1995. How would you say winning that championship was different to your first one?
I was in 95. I was up against the Volvo with Ricard Rydell and the Renault with Alain Menu, and these were the 2 guys that I was fighting for the championship with, and both those teams were run by Formula One teams. Williams were running Renault, and Arrows, the Formula One team with Tom Walkinshaw, were running the Volvos. So to beat the mighty Formula One teams with some huge budgets in my little Vauxhall Cavalier, I was quite proud of that. And it was a close year, and I knew the very first day I sat in the car, we tested it at Brands Hatch way early on in the season. And I did a few laps with it, came in and said, yeah, that's pretty good. So we plodded on during the day and we ended up quickest. And I said to the team, put it in the truck, wash it, polish it, bring it to the first race. We will win this championship. There is absolutely no doubt. I was so confident that we would win it. That was it. It was done. And it proved to be the case. We won it before the final round. And it probably consolidated by winning. I think I won 5 races in the middle of the year back to back. And that just sealed the championship really for me.
Absolutely. Well, that was, like I say, in the 90s and in the super touring era. Now, to be honest, I'm gutted that I missed out on not seeing British touring cars in that sort of era. How would you sum up that time of British touring car racing?
It was a period of excess. It was the budgets there were 24 highly paid professional drivers. There were ex-Formula One drivers, ex-World Sports Car drivers. Some of the best touring car drivers in the world were in that series. More than half the grid were foreigners. It was an extraordinarily competitive championship, and the budgets were huge. So for a 2-car team, the cheapest budget probably was Peugeot with about 3 million quid or something like that,
Really?
right up to Ford, who reputedly for 3 Mondeos had a £10 million budget. So it was a period of huge extremes, excess, massive money spending, manufacturers that were winning races on the Sunday and selling the same car on the Monday. It definitely worked for them, but it was never going to last. I mean, that period of time, we had to take what we could at the time because we knew it was never going to last. And it just got to the point it became far, far too expensive, and it just didn't make any sense any longer. So I think I saw the best period. I had the best out of it and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, I was going to ask, what was the best thing about driving in the super touring car era?
I think just the fact I made some really good friends in there. I've raced against some of the best drivers in the world. I've beaten some of the best drivers in the world. I've won lots of races at different places, and I was being paid to do something that I would have done for nothing. I was having so much fun, and it was a period in time where it was a lot of fun. And a lot of the drivers, we would all play golf together. We would eat. Sometimes there was a bunch of us, we'd eat together, and we would socialise. Whereas today they're a little bit less so, and not many of the guys are big mates with each other. And it was just lucky to be in the championship at that particular time and take advantage of it.
Yeah, but would you, on the other hand, would you say there was added pressure because, you mentioned these massive budgets with the manufacturers? Was it more stressful at times, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it was hugely important because I was employed by a manufacturer. They were the second largest manufacturer in the UK in terms of registrations. It was either Ford or Vauxhall. It was important that I won, or my teammate won races, because we were paid to do a job of work. We were paid to get publicity for the manufacturer. If they got front page coverage because the car had won a race, then it was good publicity for them. They would sell more cars off the back of it. So yeah, the pressure was there, and of course, when it's such a competitive championship and everybody's door handle to door handle, you had to be really careful that you just didn't go too far, and you'd end up pushing somebody off, then you'd get a penalty or you would get pushed off yourself. So yeah, I mean, it was a stressful period, but thoroughly enjoyable. I never really felt the stress at the time, but I suppose when I think back and look at it, it probably was an extraordinarily stressful period in my life, but I don't have too much grey hair to show for it, so it couldn't have been that bad.
And I presume the cars must have been very, very different to how they originally were when you started British touring cars. What were they like to drive?
They were amazing cars. I mean, there was more carbon fibre in the 97 Vectra than there was in the Moon Shuttle. I mean, it was just a very, very technical car. It was a bespoke vehicle. Each component was made for that year of Vectra. Then the next year it would change again, and they were just very complicated bits of kit. You didn't tune them with anything other than a laptop, and you would dial in different things, and there was sensors everywhere on the car, so you could pull the data after the end of a race, a practice or a session, look at it and say, right, well, we could improve there if we tweaked this or tweaked that. We had movement, throttle movement, brake movement. You had the angle of the car. You had the suspension movement, and you could track all that. And then you could look at it and say how you could improve certain areas. So it was a very, very technical, very complex car to drive in those days. But anybody that drove a Super Tourer that says they were easy cars to drive wasn't driving it quick enough.
Yeah.
Because when you were absolutely on the ragged edge, trying to extract 100% out of it, it was this close to biting you on the bum, because you had to drive it really, really hard to get the best out of it. And they were very nervous cars to drive when they were just on the edge. So yeah, it was fun. It was a great period in my life.
Good. Well, you drove for Vauxhall. Did you ever consider changing manufacturers? I presume that you had plenty of offers elsewhere.
I did. I had the chance to go to BMW, to Renault, to Ford, to Audi, to Alfa Romeo. I mean, I had offers to go and race in the DTM, the German touring car series. I had an opportunity to go and do that. I had an opportunity to go out and race full time in Australia in the V8s over there. But I had a young family, I had a business, and I have the same business today, and I've had it for 30 years. So to go away to Germany or go away to Australia was not going to help my business. It was going to be something would suffer. So I said no and stayed in the UK. I stuck with Vauxhall because I got on very well with the management at Vauxhall. I've had dinner at the managing director of Vauxhall's home. I had a great relationship with them. They always gave me a car that was mostly capable of being at the front end of a grid. They paid me well to do a job, and I just, I stuck with that. Had I moved to places like BMW or Audi, then maybe I'd have moved on to do races in other parts of the world. But it wasn't what I set out to do, as I say, mainly because I had four of a family, a wife, a home, and a commitment to my business. So I felt it was more important to still treat it slightly as a hobby more than the mainstream thing. But hey, it's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. And you finished British Touring Cars at the end of the 90s. Did you ever consider returning?
Not necessarily to touring cars, no. I raced when I packed in British Touring Cars. I packed in because of a family. My father passed away, and I had to come back really and concentrate on the business and really sort of get into that rather than touring cars. In the late 90s, I spent many days in a week away testing or racing. So I needed to sort of take a breath and come back to work and come back to business and see where we were. I then quite easily got bored with that, and I went and drove some sports cars. I raced a Porsche for a while, and then a Dodge Viper. So there was an opportunity there to do sports car racing, but to go back to touring cars, I'd won 2 championships. I'd nearly won another 2 or 3 because for a period in the 90s, I was either first, second, third in the championship for many years. So I was right at the thick of it. I'd won them. And to coin the phrase, I'd got the T-shirt. Did I really need to go back? Probably not, because if I went back, I would be expected to win. Yeah. If I didn't win, then I'd lost my edge. So I didn't see any gain to me going back to it at that point. I felt that I'd got the best from it. I'd left pretty much at the top, and I don't really regret that.
Good. Well, what would you say was the most difficult part about racing at that sort of level at the time?
Probably the commitment every time you sat in the car, and it didn't matter if it was a test session, a practice session, a qualifying session, or a race. You had to be 100% every single lap, every day, day in, day out. So it was the commitment to that and the concentration level of doing that was probably the real challenge. And Yeah, you had to be on it all the time. You had to be thinking about it all the time. When I would come up the road, I would leave a race meeting, I'd come home and I'd leave Thruxton and I'm driving home. That's probably a 7-hour journey for me. And for 2 of these hours, I'd be back on the phone to my race engineer on the way home, talking about what we could do to improve it for the next race. So, it was about living, sleeping, breathing, eating the whole British Touring Car Championship. It was about that commitment to it.
Absolutely. Well, I won't keep you for too much longer. Just a few more questions to ask. You've had plenty of success over the years in British Touring Car Championship. What races stick out to you the most?
The one I think I really cherished the most was I think it was 98, Nigel Mansell, the race with Mansell at Donington, which I won. Nigel was leading the race at one point. It was a very long race, as I recollect. I came from somewhere down the pack. I'd been in the gravel and got back out. Mansell led the race, and then eventually it was a wet race drying out, and eventually I passed him to win the race. And that was probably one of the best touring car races ever. And if you haven't seen it and you get the chance to watch it, then I think most people that have seen it have said it was probably the best touring car race of the 90s. So that was what I remember with some great pride.
Yeah, definitely. And who would you say is or was your biggest British touring car rival from that time?
I'd probably two of them would have been Richard Rydell and Alain Menu. Richard I could trust. Menu not so much. Alain was a bit harder to pass. He would quite easily touch you before you get past, whereas Richard was pretty clean and tidy. So these two guys would probably be the hardest and probably two of the best pedalers out there.
Absolutely. Well, final question. You've been a part of so many iconic moments in British Touring Car Championship. What stands out to you the most, would you say?
Probably everybody keeps going back to the 1992 Steve Soper incident at Silverstone. That was 28 years ago.
Yeah.
Even your dad would have been very young then, never mind you. So I would suggest that probably sticks in everybody's mind because it made the front pages of everything. It made touring cars in those days a bit of a household name. And I think that one incident probably created more media coverage and increased the awareness to everybody of what the British Touring Car Championship was all about. Close racing, real combat style driving, and some real characters. So I think that's the defining moment, I suppose, for me.
Yeah, well, in my family, we're all big British touring car fans, and in our household, the man's an animal is quite a commonly used phrase. So thank you for that. It's
my pleasure. It's been good talking to you, and I hope you succeed in getting the job. I hope you take that forward, and one of those days, if you get this commentator's role, then please give me a phone, drop me an email, something, tell me you've got it.
Oh, thank you very much. That's much appreciated. Well, yeah, like you say, it's been brilliant to chat. So thank you very much.
Okay, best of luck, Louis. Take care. Cheers.